صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
زيارة عاشوراء. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. We perform the visitation and the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein on behalf of ourselves, on behalf of our family members, on behalf of all our marhumin and marhumat, all of those who have asked us to remember them in du'as, and on behalf of the shuhada and the ulama who have given and sacrificed their lives in the way of the teachings of Father Mohamed. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Assalamu alayka ya ibn Rasulillah. Assalamu alayka ya khiyaratullah wa ibn khiyaratih. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوصيين. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. السلام عليك وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار. يا أبا عبد الله لقد عظمت الرزية جلت وعظمت المصيبة بك علينا وعلى جميع أهل الإسلام، وجلت وعظمت مصيبتك في السماوات على جميع أهل السماوات. فلعن الله أمة أسست أساس الظلم والجور عليكم أهل البيت. ولعن الله أمة دفعتكم عن مقامكم وأزالتكم عن مراتبكم التي رتبكم الله فيها. ولعن الله أمة قتلتكم. ولعن الله الممهدين لهم بالتمكين من قتالكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم ومن أشيائهم وأتباعهم وأوليائهم. يا أبا عبد الله إني سلم لمن سالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم إلى يوم القيامة. ولعن الله آل زياد وآل مروان. ولعن الله بني أمية قاطبة. ولعن الله ابن مرجان. ولعن الله عمر بن سعد. ولعن الله الشمرا. ولعن الله أمة أسرجت وألجمت وتنقبت لقتاله. بأبي أنت وأمي لقد عظم مصابي بك. فأسأل الله الذي أكرم مقامك وأكرمني بك أن يرزقني طلب خارك مع إمام منشور من أهل بيت محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم اجعلني عندك وجيها بالحسين عليه السلام في الدنيا والآخرة. يا أبا عبد الله إني أتقرب إلى الله وإلى رسوله وإلى أمير المؤمنين وإلى فاطمة وإلى الحسن وإليك بموالاتك وبالبراءة ممن قاتلك ونصب لك الحرب وبالبراءة ممن أسس أساس الظلم والجور عليكم وأبرأوا إلى الله وإلى رسوله صلى الله عليه وآله ممن أسس أساس ذلك وبنى عليه بنيانا وجرى في ظلمه وجوره عليكم وعلى أشيائكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم وأتقرب إلى الله ثم إليكم بموالاتكم وموالاة وليكم وبالبراءة من أعدائكم والناصبين لكم الحرب وبالبراءة من أشيائهم وأتباعهم. إني سلم لمن سالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم وولي لمن والاكم وعدو لمن عاداكم. فأسأل الله الذي أكرمني بمعرفتكم ومعرفة أوليائكم ورزقني البراءة من أعدائكم أن يجعلني معكم في الدنيا والآخرة وأن يثبت لي عندكم قدم صدق في الدنيا والآخرة وأسأله أن يبلغني المقام المحمود لكم عند الله وأن يرزقني طلب ثاري مع إمام هدى ظاهر ناطق بالحق منكم. وأسأل الله بحقكم وبالشأن الذي لكم عنده أن يعطيني بمصابي بكم أفضل ما يعطي مصابا بمصيبته مصيبة ما أعظمها وأعظم رزيتها في الإسلام وفي جميع السماوات والأرض. اللهم اجعلني في مقام هذا ممن تناله منك صلوات ورحمة ومغفرة. اللهم اجعل محياي محيا محمد وآل محمد ومماتي ممات محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إن هذا يوم تبركت به بنو أمية وابن آكلة الأكبر اللعين ابن اللعين على لسانك ولسان نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله في كل موطن وموقف وقف فيه نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم لعن أبا سفيان ومعاوية ويزيد بن معاوية، عليهم منك اللعنة أبد الآبدين. وهذا يوم فرحت به آل زياد وآل مروان بقتلهم الحسين صلوات الله. اللهم فضائف عليهم اللعن منك والعذاب الأليم. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك في هذا اليوم وفي موقف هذا وأيام حياتي بالبراءة منهم واللعنة عليهم، وبالموالاة لنبيك وآل نبيك عليه وعليهم السلام. اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد، وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم لعن الإصابة التي جاهدت الحسين عليه السلام وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. اللهم خص أنت أول ظالم باللعن مني وابدأ به أولا، ثم لعن الثاني والثالث والرابع. اللهم لعن يزيد خامسا، ولعن عبيد الله ابن زياد وابن مرجان وعمر بن سعد الشمرة وآل أبي سفيان وآل زياد وآل مروان إلى يوم القيامة. سجدة. اللهم لك الحمد حمد الشاكرين لك على مصابهم. الحمد لله على عظيم رزيتي. اللهم ارزقني شفاعة الحسين يوم الورود، وثبت لي قدم صدق عندك مع الحسين وأصحاب الحسين الذين بذلوا مهجهم دون الحسين عليه السلام. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله بارئ الخلائق الأجمعين، باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، لا سيما ولي الله الحجة ابن الحسن صاحب الأمر والزمان.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم وعلى منكري فضائلهم وعلى من غصب حقوقهم وعلى من شرك في ولايتهم من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. آمين رب العالمين. أما بعد، اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد، وآخر تابع له على ذلك. نوروا مجالسكم بذكر محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أحبائي, yesterday we explored and we analyzed to a certain extent a passage of history by referencing the historical text of tafsir known as Tafsir al-Ayyashi by the Sheikh al-Jalil al-Qadir, Sheikh Mohamed ibn Mas'ud al-Ayyashi rahmatullah alayh, who lived during the time of Hussein ibn Ruh al-Nawbakhti, the third Na'ib of Mawlana Sahib al-Amri wa Zaman. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajah. And we were able to establish from this text that the motive of the people of Saqifa when they approached the door and the house of Amir al-Mu'minin and Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen, the motive was to not only take forcefully bay'ah from Amir al-Mu'minin, but in the words of Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen, the motive of the people of Saqifa was to engage Imam Ali in war, assassinate him. The idea and the motive, as expressed by Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen, is that they were there to kill Amir al-Mu'mineen. And the idea was to build this version of Islam which is free of Ahlul Bayt. A version of Islam in which the legacy of Ahlul Bayt does not exist. And you find that when the attempt to assassinate Amirul Mu'mineen did not work through the intervention of Sayyidati Nisa al-Alameen, you find that the people of Saqifa embarked upon other governmental policies that ensured that the dhikr and the fada'il of Alim Muhammad were extinguished and removed from the equation of Islam in its entirety. Rather, they did not only stop at the dhikr and the fada'il of Amirul Mu'mineen, because we have to understand over here, when we analyze history from the perspective of Aqidah, Shufu, Ahibai, we live at a time where knowledge is disseminated. Knowledge is widely available, and the knowledge, access to knowledge has become easier. And perhaps if you were to compare with the generations of the past, this is probably that era in which access to knowledge has become one of the most easiest tasks, whether it be through technology, whether it be through publications of hard copies and the ease of access to literature that perhaps in the past was not possible. You find that within all this literature and within all this hadith, within all this literature, as a person begins to educate himself or herself in Islamic history, as a historian, the goal of history is what? To identify and to side with truth across a passage of time. For when a person studies Islamic history, as a historian, as a researcher, as a person who is looking to seek and search for his own soul, one of the fundamental requirements of understanding history correctly is that a person must be grounded in ilmul kalam or usuluddin. So long as your usuluddin is on point, your ability to understand history, read through the lines and differentiate between that which is authentic and non-authentic, that base becomes your teachings of usuluddin. There are certain principles, I'll give you by an example which is very basic. In regards to the Holy Prophet of Islam, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. For when you understand through Usuluddin and the chapter of Nabuwah that the Prophet is a prophet of mercy, this Rahmah then becomes the Mizan through which you will understand the biography and the personality of Rasulullah through the books of history. And you have a look at the scholars from the Mukhalifeen, be it from the likes of Tabari or Bukhari or anyone else, you find that this vicious animalistic image of Rasulullah, which is portrayed within the books of history, why are they believable and acceptable? On the credibility of the author? No, on the basis that the people didn't understand, the masses didn't understand that the base of Sirah and Tariq is actually embedded within Usuluddin. If you were to understand the core aspects of Nabuwah, you use this as a measure to mark and authenticate whatever falls within this parameter is the first step of authentication, and whatever goes against it is thrown out. Same thing, you find that within the books of the Muslimin in regards to the concept of the existence of God and the existence of Allah Azza wa Jal. You find that you have from the ulama of the mukhalifin who are of the opinion that God has a body and he has a leg and he will put this leg in the hell of fire and Jahannam, and then they go on to talk about the actual leg and the nature of that leg. Yet if a person was to understand ilmul kalam and usulul deen from the Quran, it becomes the basis for negation for these baseless accounts that are attributed within the books of Islamic history. For if we understand this, Ahibai, that usulul deen and your correct faith system becomes a fundamental prerequisite in your journey as a historian when it comes to evaluating, reading between the lines in history and authenticating history. We come forward over here and you have to understand from the hadith and from usulul deen that any act of enmity portrayed towards Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam in essence is hatred portrayed towards Rasulullah. Because the Quran in itself from Ayatul Mubahilah says, Anfusana wa anfusakum. And from all the mukhalifin, there is absolutely no two people who disagree on the fact that Nafsul Nabi is Amirul Mu'mineen Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Enmity towards Amirul Mu'mineen in essence is a hidden enmity that was manifested against Rasulullah. To cover up the fada'il of Amirul Mu'mineen is to cover the fada'il of Rasulullah. To cover the tariq of Amirul Mu'mineen is to cover up the tariq of Rasulullah. And if you understand this, we come back to our main point and carry forward. The people of Saqifa embarked upon a mission to assassinate Amirul Mu'mineen. Sayyidat Nisa'il Alameen intervenes and she exposes them, for they are not able to kill Amirul Mu'mineen. However, the presence of Amirul Mu'mineen is a thorn to the legitimacy of the government of Saqifa. The presence of Amirul Mu'mineen as an authority is seen as a threat to the government of Saqifa, because this government of Saqifa is built on what fundamental basis? To uphold the teachings and the sunnah of Rasulullah after Rasulullah, which is why they name the leaders as the khulafa. Khulafa, plural for what? Khalif. Khalif, successor. Successor of who? Khalif Rasul Allah. Successors of Rasulullah as in those who will continue the legacy of Rasulullah after him. Tayyib. If you understand this and you understand the fact that the existence of Amirul Mu'mineen amongst them was a threat, because in comparison with Amirul Mu'mineen, there is no other person who would be able to be in the position of the interpretation of the Sunnah of Rasulullah. No one in a better position than Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam. For what did the people of Saqifa resort to? Remember from yesterday, the failed assassination attempt on Amirul Mu'mineen, number one. Number two, now that they could not kill Amirul Mu'mineen, there was a systematic governmental approach across the entire Islamic land to destroy anything and everything that had to do with the legacy and the sunnah of Rasulullah, which includes the fada'il and superiority of Amirul Mu'mineen. And this in reality, Ahibani, bitter as the truth may be for Muslims, bitter as the truth may be, the reality is that the elected people of Saqifa in a forceful, flawed election. And this is us giving them by no means any sort of credibility. The reality is that the people of Saqifa embarked upon a campaign to destroy the legacy of the prophetic literature from the early days of Islam. شوفوا حديث الشريف or historical narrations that have been recorded by the Mukhalifin in their own books. This first incident, the destruction of prophetic literature upon the martyrdom of Rasulullah, the main goal is to create an Islam that has no Ahlul Bayt inside of it, number one, and number two, to create an Islam that is free of the Sunnah of Rasulullah in itself. شوفوا حديث الشريف, or not حديث الشريف, but a historical narration, which is mentioned in the text تذكرة الحفاظ by Allama al-Dhahabi. Al-Dhahabi is one of the most respected historians from the school of the Mukhalifin. He goes on to mention in this text, أن أبا بكر جمع عن النبي 500 حديث. Abu Bakr had collected 500 narrations that were narrated on authority of Rasulullah. Look at what the historians say. Jama'a anin nabi 500 hadith. He didn't say Jama'a 500. He didn't say that we gathered 500 prophetic hadith that he had heard. Hadith that have been heard on authority of Rasulullah. He had possession of 500 such hadith. So he collected them. ثم بات ليلته يتقلب. So when he gathered these 500 hadith, that night he went to sleep. But when he went to sleep, he was absolutely restless. So he was turning to his right and to his left. وَلَمَّا أَصْبَحَ قَالَ لِعَائِشَةَ. And when he woke up the next morning, he said to Aisha, "Ya bunay, O my daughter, حَلِمِّي الْأَحَادِيثَ الَّتِي عِنْدَكِ." So Abu Bakr, when he woke up in the morning, he told his daughter Aisha, "Give me all the hadith that are in your possession from Rasulullah. The hadith of Rasulullah that you have, bring them to me." She goes on to say, فَجِئْتُهُ بِهَا فَدَعَى بِنَا. I brought all the prophetic hadith that were in my possession and I gave it to him, to Abu Bakr. And he had 500 hadith that he had gathered on authority of Rasulullah. Look at what Aisha says. فَحَرَقَهَا. He gathered all these prophetic traditions that were gathered and collected on papers and on skin of sheep and so on and so forth. He put all of them together and he set the hadith of Rasulullah on fire. "500 hadith of Rasulullah burnt to ashes." Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Quran, وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. He does not speak out of vain except that everything that the Prophet utters is revelation. عَلَيْكُمْ بِالْحَقِّ, because we are people of rationale. Do you remember a few years back, there was an incident where some people went and burnt a copy of the Quran. And when they burnt the copy of the Quran, what happened across a number of so-called Islamic countries? There were protests on the road and death threats and boycott and everything going. So Baba, why all this? You said they burnt the book of Allah. They burnt the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Habibi, the leader of Saqifa burnt the words of Rasulullah, which are equivalent to the words of Allah. Antum, did you protest against this? Did anyone boycott against this? 500 hadith from Rasulullah. Every letter that comes out of the blessed mouth of Rasulullah is more treacherous than everything in the entire universe. 500 of these hadith were burnt. This is on a single occasion. How much the world is madloom. One hadith can change the destiny of an entire universe. 500. Where the Muslims could have been with this? This is one event. Everybody was surprised that this action happened. According to the author, even Aisha was surprised. So she said to him, فَقُلْتُ لِمَا أَحْرَقْتَهَا? Why did you burn these prophetic hadith? This is the remembrance, this is the legacy of the Prophet of Islam, of our Nabi, Khatamul Anbiya. Why would you burn his memory and his legacy and words of guidance for mankind for eternity? Why would you do this? Look at the response. He said, Khashitu an amut. I'm scared that I might die. وهي عندي. وهي عندي. فيكون فيها أحاديث عن رجل قد ائتمنته ووثقته ولم يكن كما حدثني فأكون قد نقلت ذلك. Abu Bakr says, when Aisha asked him, why did you burn the hadith? He says, I was scared that I might die and these hadith of Rasulullah, 500 hadith, perhaps they emanated from people who I thought are trustworthy. And then it turns out that they were not trustworthy, and I am the reason for the dissemination of misinformation. I don't know what is more a'jab, the burning of the hadith or the justification to do such a crime. Ajib. An intellect, when you have 500 hadith, and on the assumption that you have this legitimate fear that some hadith may be authentic, some are not authentic, some are true, some are misleading or misguiding, rather than destroying all the literature, the most logical thing to do as a normal human being would be, let us collect this hadith, let us bring the experts of hadith who knew Rasulullah the most, and let us begin a system and a process of filtering, identifying and separating that which is haqq from that which is batil. The person with the lowest level of intellect will tell you this is a logical solution. Then how is it that the Khalif of the Muslims missed this? Actually, they didn't miss this. They knew this is the right thing to do. But do you know the problem with this solution? You would have to depend on Amirul Mu'mineen to separate that which is haqq from batil. Because within the books of the Mukhalifin, it is stated that Rasulullah said, Aliyun ma'al haqq wal haqqu ma'a Ali. You have this hadith, in essence, Aliyun and you have hadith, Aliyun ma'al Quran wal Quranu ma'a Ali. The haqq is with Ali. The true interpretation of the Quran through the Sunnah of Rasulullah is with Amir al-Mu'mineen Imam Ali. And this is narrated in the books of the Mukhalifin with different words, with the same meaning, from Hakim and Nishapuri to Tirmidhi Ibn Asakir in his Tarikh Dimishq also mentions this. So, if there was any doubt and they began an exercise to separate true hadith from fake hadith, who is the judge? Amirul Mu'mineen. But because they were in the process of creating an Islam without Amirul Mu'mineen, they actually ended up creating an Islam that is devoid of the Sunnah of Rasulullah to begin with. For if you have an Islam where the Hadith of Rasulullah is destroyed, and you have an Islam in which Ahlul Bayt does not exist, ya deen is this? Which Islam is this? It's the Islam that you and I see prevalent today. And it didn't stop there. Ziyarat Ashura has keys. الذي أسس أساس الظلم والجور عليكم. Who established the foundation of dhulm? Eternal damnation belongs to them first, because they paved the way. They opened the doors. And by the taghut of the ummah burning hadith, he opened the door for the fir'aun of the ummah to also burn hadith. Because historians then go on to say, this is during the time of Umar ibn Khattab. And this is mentioned in the text Taqeedul Ilm. Now, because the precedent has already been set by the one before him, the next one to come followed in the same footsteps and went even further. Look at what he goes on to say. Taqeedul Ilm is from the books of the Mukhalifin. Anna Umar balagahu annahu qad dhahara fi aydin nas kutubin. It came to the news of Umar that amongst the people, or from amongst the companions, they had books of hadith. People who would come from Yemen, from Najran, from all these places, they would come, they would look at Rasulullah, they would write. They would write what they heard, they would write what they see in the Rasulullah. So when they go back to their hometowns and their villages, they would show their people, this is what we have written, this is what we have seen. So it came to his knowledge, to Umar's knowledge, that these people have collected books. فَاسْتَنْكَرَهَا وَكَرَهَهَا. He despised them and he rebuked them. If you are upholding the Islam of Rasulullah, why hold this enmity against the Sunnah and the Hadith of Rasulullah? And keep this in your mind. What was there within the Hadith that was so critical that they had to destroy that evidence? What was in this Hadith of Rasulullah? وَطَلَبَ مِنَ النَّاسِ. Look at what the historian goes on to say. وَطَلَبَ مِنَ النَّاسِ رُؤْيَتَهَا فَظَنُّوا أَنَّهُ يُرِيدَ أَن يَنْظُرَ فِيهَا وَيُقَوِّمُهَا عَلَى أَمْرٍ لَا يَكُونُ فِيهِ اخْتِلَافٌ. So Abu Hafsa called for all these books to be brought to him. So the people willingly went to Masjid al-Nabawi with their books, thinking that he would go through the books and he would separate that which is authentic from that in which there is differences between the people. Now, understand that the historian is telling us during the time of Ibn Khattab, there already existed hadith in regards to Rasulullah in which people had difference of opinion. They didn't know whether this truly belongs to Rasulullah or not. Ikhtilaf means variations in accounts. Somebody would say the Prophet did A, the other person would say B. Somebody would say he did C, another person would come and say D. So there was already an ikhtilaf. Differences, there was no agreement on a lot of the actions of Rasulullah. Why? Because the true door of Haqq was isolated. So in any case, they went and they brought all their books. They brought it to the Khalifa, so-called Khalifa, thinking that he is going to filter and distinguish between everything. فَأَتَوْهُ بِكُتُبِهِمْ. So they came with their books. Look at what the historian says. فَأَحْرَقَهَا بِالنَّارِ. All the books that existed with the hadith of Rasulullah was set on fire. The destruction of the Sunnah of Rasulullah by those who established the government of Saqifa immediately after Rasulullah. It is important that these aspects of history are studied and are understood in a frame of logic and non-violence. The reality is that the truth is a very bitter pill. But because it is bitter does not mean that the truth should be concealed. There is a manner and there is a way in which to preach the truth, and there is a manner and there is a way in which to react to the truth as well. And no free soul should ever be persecuted or met with violence when he or she speaks non-violently about the truth. Dalil bid dalil, counter proof with proof. But the reality of the matter is that the party of Shaitan knows no other response other than violence. Karbala, Imam al-Hussein called them to dialogue. Shufu Karbala. Imam al-Hussein on the 10th of Muharram, 3 days hungry and thirsty. His children and his women are weeping in the tents. Imam al-Hussein goes in the heat of Karbala and he delivers a khutbah. For what? To guide the people for hidayah. Refer back to the Maqatil. Whilst Imam al-Hussein was speaking, they said, "Oh, Hussein ibn Ali, you have bored us with your talk." While the Imam delivered a khutbah, Umar ibn Sa'ad responded by shooting an arrow towards the tents of Imam al-Hussein and said to his people, "Bear witness that I was the first one to shoot an arrow towards Hussein ibn Ali." Peaceful call towards haqq responded with violence. Peaceful janaza of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba. Peaceful janaza of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba going towards Masjid al-Nabawi. So Aisha cried out, "Allah, Allah, Ya Bani Hashim, la tadfunu fi bayti man la uhibba." Says, "By Allah, Bani Hashim, do not bury in my house the one that I do not love." They said to her, "This is the wasiyah of Hassan, Sayyid Shabab Ahl al-Jannah, Rayhanat al-Rasul." How did they respond? 50 arrows on the janazah of Imam al-Mujtaba. Non-violence was countered with violence. Hidayah was countered with violence. What did they do to Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra? Was Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra armed? Did she have any weapons? Did she was a threat to the people? She stood behind the door and she said to him, "Ama tattaqillah, do you not have taqwa?" And the response was that she was crushed between the door and the wall. And Mohsin was shamed. This has been the daydan and the nature of battle against haqq. That truth is met with violence. Until today, we're in the same cycle. Ahibai Mu'mineen, tonight is our final majlis for Fatimiyya. And I want to relate for you the grief of Sayyida Zainab al-Kubra on the death and the martyrdom of her mother Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra. See, Sayyida Zainab alayha salam, the death of her mother hurt her. It was very painful for Sayyida Zainab. But Sayyida Zainab knew from a very young age that she has to be strong on the martyrdom of her mother, because everything is a lesson for Sayyida Zainab. She knew that the tragedy of her mother is an imtihan that will prepare her for another tragedy in Karbala. So Zainab remained strong. But the memory of her mother remained very much fresh in the mind of Zainab, which is why one of the ulama say, this is Siddiqat al-Sughra Zainab, who lived in the shadow, in the memory, and is a reflection of her mother, Siddiqat al-Kubra. Her entire life, Sayyida Zainab, Zainab wept for the tragedy of her mother, Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra. She wept for the tragedy of Sayyida Fatima. And then Sayyida Zahra saw the tragedy of the door unfold in front of her again in Karbala, which is why the alim says there were a number of times in Karbala. When Sayyida Zainab was in tragedy, or when Sayyida Zainab was in difficulty, she looked up towards the heavens. She looked up towards the heavens and she cried out, Wa Umma ya Fatima. She cried out a number of times on the day of Ashura, and she cried out and she remembered her mother Fatima. She cried out, oh mother, oh Fatima. Yani there were certain events that happened on Ashura that reminded her of the incident of the door. What does the alim say? The alim says the first time Sayyida Zainab looked up towards the heavens and cried, oh mother Fatima. The first time she did this is when the Zalims began to burn the tents on Sham Ghariba. When the tents of the women were burnt, Sayyida Zainab sees Rabab and the rest of the children choking from the burning smoke in the tents, running out. Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra remembered how her mother was choking behind the door, and it is as if the day of the door has unfolded on Sham Ghariban, which is why she cried out, oh mother Fatima. Allah, 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 Allah. The second time, when the tents were burning and the children ran out of the burning tents, the narration mentions that Khuli caught one of the children, Sayyida Ruqayya, and he slapped her across the face in such a violent manner. The face of Sayyida Ruqayya became swollen. At this moment, Sayyida Zainab looked up towards the heaven. She said, oh my mother Fatima, on the day that they slapped you behind the door, they slap your granddaughters today on the plains of Karbala. Allah, Allah, Allah. Do you know the hadith says that when they entered into the house, and when Ibn Khattab slapped Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, he slapped her in such a manner that her earring broke. Do you know that moment what happened? Sayyidah Zainab went 5 years old, she was at that time. Sayyidah Zainab held the hand of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba. She says, Akhi Hassan, oh my brother Hassan, why are they slapping my mother? Allah, Allah. And in the same way, the younger children, Hamida and Khawla and Safiya, are asking Sayyidah Kulthum, why are they slapping our sister Ruqayya? Allah, 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 ba'ad. Sayyidah Zainab remembers she was sitting in the house when Amir al-Mu'mineen was giving the ghusl to Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. Suddenly Amir al-Mu'mineen took a step back and he took a deep breath and he began to scream and he began to weep. Asma bint Umays comes behind the door and she says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, you should have sabr. You are the one who teaches us about sabr. If you cry, then how will we have patience? Sayyidah Zainab is in the room. She's listening and she's watching. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Oh Asma, I shall have sabr even if this sabr is very bitter. But while giving the ghusl, I felt the broken rib of Fatima. For Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he felt the broken rib of Fatima, Amir al-Mu'mineen cried out and began to weep. And this is why in Karbala, when Sayyidah Zainab saw the trampled body of Imam al-Hussein, and she saw Zain al-Abidin weeping and crying, she remembered the day that her father was giving ghusl to her mother Fatima. Allah, Allah. Zainab was strong, which is why the narrations mention that after marrying Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, Sayyidah Zainab would wipe the tears of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And in the same way, on the day of Ashura, when the children were looking at the mangled body of Imam al-Hussein lying on the plains of Karbala, on one side Umar ibn Sa'ad trampling the body, and on the other hand Shimr with the head on a sword. Zainab is the one who wiped the tears of the women and the children. Zainab wiped everyone's tears. Who is there to wipe the tears of Zainab?
छुड़ा लो बाबा। सकीना को छुड़ा लो बाबा। सकीना को छुड़ा लो बाबा के रस्सियों से। सकीना को छुड़ा लो बाबा। छुड़ा लो या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन। शाम का बाजार खुजा आबिदे बिलाल खुजा। शाम का बाजार खुजा आबिदे बिलाल खुजा। सैद में दिलगीर खुजा अजवाए अबियार खुजा। तेरी उम्मत के ज़िम्मे पे निकल गई। उम्मत के ज़िम्मे पे निकल गई। खुदाना चाहे हूँ मैं शाम आए शाम आए शाम आए। एक तुझको भैया से तेरी मेरे होती। घर देखो निगाह मेरे तेरे ज़ख्मों को हाथों से धोती। मेरे सर में रहना देखो भैया चली हूँ मैं शाम आए शाम आए शाम आए।
Marche Mevlana!
कभी नजरे उठाकर न देखा हाथ किसी से मेरे अंधेरे और सबर नहीं मेरे पर्दा। कैसे फिर मैं जाऊंगी काजी फिर मैं जाऊंगी काजी जब दिल में आएगा ना। शाम आए शाम आए शाम زهرة يا زهرة يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا خاتم الأنبياء السلام عليك يا مولانا أمير المؤمنين أسد الله الخالق ووسيع رسول الله وخليفته بلا فصل السلام عليك يا مولاتي الصديقة الشهيدة سيدة نساء العالمين فاطمة الزهراء السلام عليك يا مولانا سيد شباب أهل الجنة إمام حسن المجتبى السلام عليك يا مولانا يا أبا عبد الله الحسين المظلوم المقتول بأرض كربلاء السلام عليك وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك لا سيما مولانا أبا الفضل العباس السلام عليكم يا سبايا أهل بيت النبوة لا سيما سيدة زينب الكبرى السلام عليكم يا شهداء كربلاء جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليكم يا أئمة الهدى وولاة أمر الله، إمام علي بن الحسين زين العابدين، وإمام محمد بن علي الباكر علوم النبيين، وإمام جعفر بن محمد أسنة الصادقين، وإمام موسى بن جعفر الكاظم حبيش الظالمين، وإمام علي بن موسى الرضا ناصر الدين، وإمام محمد بن علي الجواد شاب أهل البيت، وإمام علي بن محمد الهادي علم الهدى، وإمام حسن بن علي العسكري المظلوم في حياتي وبعد موته. السلام عليك يا مولانا القائم الحجة المنتظر بقية الله في أرض المهدي. اللهم عجل لولينا الفرج واجعلنا من أنصاره وأشيائه ومن المستشهدين بين يديه. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن
صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.